Yevamos Daf Yod contains one Mishnah and two primary sugyas. The first half of the Daf, before the Mishnah, is discussing the opinion of Rav about what happens when a Ketani Yisoma who's married to Derabanan grows up. Does her marriage automatically mature into a Deraisa marriage, or do the husband and the wife need to make a Deraisa marriage, which can be accomplished through the Bia? The Gemara will bring two proofs as to what Rav holds and reject them. Then we get to our next Mishnah, which will introduce the topic of a Cheresh and a Chareshes, a deaf mute as far as they are concerned, the halachos of Chalitza and the divorce. The Gemara will spend most of the daf trying to disprove a statement of Rava that there's a difference whether they were born in that condition or they developed a condition later in life. Let's begin the Gemara. We've just introduced the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel as to Rav and Rav Sheshes as to what happens when a Ketani Yisoma who is married by her brother or her mother and therefore only has a kiddushin, only has a marriage midirabbanon. What happens when she grows up and she becomes a gedola? The question was, do we say that this marriage automatically matures into a deraisa marriage? Or do we say that there has to be a kiddushin of some sort to make it into a deraisa marriage once she's old enough to do kiddushin deraisa? Now that could be just the bia, just a normal bia between the former Yisoma and her husband. That would be l'shem kiddushin. But if the bia has not been done, she's not considered to be married, even though she's a gedola now, because her kiddushin initially was only midrabanan. So Rav had said that it's not automatic. You need to have a kiddushin or a bia or something to make the marriage be a deraisa marriage. Now the Gemara wants to bring two proofs that Rav does not hold that way, and it will be a kasha on the report that Rav holds that way. So the first proof is from a statement of Rav, machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. In the following case, we have a ketana who does not do what me, and she grows up, and then she gets married to someone else. Now, that marriage to that someone else will only be chal if she did not have a deraisa marriage to her original husband. So Rav says the marriage to someone else is valueless. And Shmuel says no, it was valuable and she requires a get from him. That means Rav holds that the marriage to her first husband did mature and become a deraisa marriage, and that's why the second one doesn't count at all. Now, what is this machlokes Rav and Shmuel over? So the Gemara says the simplest explanation is that we're talking about where they did not do anything to make the marriage more mature. They did not do a bia after she grew up. And therefore, the question is exactly our question is machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Did the marriage mature automatically or not? Shmuel would hold that it did not mature automatically, and therefore the marriage to the second man counts and she requires a get. And Rav holds that the marriage did mature automatically, even though they didn't do a bia. She's now married to her first husband, deraisa, and the second husband's action means nothing. So that would be clearly showing that Rav holds that way, which is a kasha on what we had said earlier at the end of the last stop. So the Gemara says, no, that's not the pshat of the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. We're not talking about where they didn't do a bia. We're talking about where they did do a bia. And the machlokes between them is as follows. Rav holds they did a bia, and like we said, Rav holds you have to do the bia, but they did the bia, and the bia was l'shem kiddushin, or there's an automatic assumption that it's l'shem kiddushin, and therefore she's now married to her first husband, and that's why the second husband's marriage is meaningless. Shmuel says they did not explicitly have in mind that this bia is l'shem kiddushin, and Shmuel holds you do not assume that a bia that's done by a married couple is automatically l'shem kiddushin if their kiddushin is no good, and therefore this was not a bia l'shem kiddushin. Even though they did a bia, it still doesn't count, and her marriage was not renewed, and therefore the second marriage to the second husband counts and she requires the get from him. Says the Gemara, this cannot possibly be the correct explanation of the machlokes Rav and Shmuel, because they already had this machlokes somewhere else in a different case. What's that case? That's the case of a man and a woman who get married regularly, a regular adult woman, no yisoma, and what happens is as follows. They do kiddushin first, and the kiddushin has a t'nai on it, on the condition she doesn't have a mum, or on the condition she doesn't have any nedarim on her. Then they continue, and they go and they do a chuppah and a bia, but there the man does not mention the t'nai. So how do we view this? So Rav says we view this as if he was mochel the t'nai. He understands even if the t'nai is not fulfilled, she does have a mum or neder on her, he still forgives it. And the reason is because he's doing a bia now, and this bia is assumed to be l'shem kedushin. Any bia that a man does with a woman who he's presuming to make his wife is a l'shem kedushin, just like Rav holds here. Now Shmuel holds otherwise. Shmuel says no. The bia that he did is meant to be a continuation of the original Tanai. There is no automatic if he's doing a bia that's l'shem kedushin. So you see, they already have this machlokes about whether any bia that's done by a married couple or a couple on the way to a marriage counts as an automatic kiddushin or not. So why would that be? This machlokas here again. Therefore, machlokas here must be something else. Machlokas must be whether or not the marriage of a katana matures automatically. And now we're back to our kasha. Somewhere it says no. You're right. It's the same machlokas, but we have to say it twice in both cases just because I would know one, I don't know the other. And the reason for that is that the case of the Tanai, the person is not aware that there's a problem here. He doesn't know that there's anything wrong. The case of the Katana, he knows that the Kiddushin to a Katana is meaningless, and therefore he has in mind that the Bia that he's going to do when she grows up, that is a Bia l'shem Kiddushin. It's more logical to assume that Bia was l'shem Kiddushin than the Bia that he did after a Tanai where he doesn't know that the Tanai wasn't fulfilled. Therefore, if we only said one of the two cases, I wouldn't know both opinions. If we only said the case of the Tanai, so I may assume over there's no reason that he should have in mind l'shem kiddushin, and Rav would agree that it's not l'shem kiddushin. And if he only said the case of the Katana, I might think that over there it makes more sense that it should be l'shem kiddushin, and even Shmuel would agree that it is l'shem kiddushin. Therefore, we have to list both cases, but really that's what the machlokes is about. All right, that concludes the Gemara's first kasha on Rav and answer. Now the Gemara is going to bring another kasha, a very similar structure to the kasha, except here instead of quoting a machlokes we have between Rav and Shmuel, the Gemara is going to quote an incident that happened with the psak of the Talmidim of Rav. So this incident happened was with a lady named Ban Rush. She got Kiddushin when she was a Kana. She grew up, and then she went to a chuppah. Her husband brought her to a chuppah. At the chuppah, another man came and grabbed her away, did Kiddushin to her. Now, there were Talmidim of Rav there. They were Rav Bruna and Rav Chanano. And they paskin that she does not require a get from the second man. The second man's Kiddushin is nothing, which means that the Kiddushin of the first man had become deraisa. If that's the case, here clearly she didn't have biyad because she was just on the way to the chuppah. So Rav must hold that the Kiddushin matures automatically, even without a biyah, even without another Kiddushin being redone. So the Gemara offers two rejections to this kasha. The first answer the Gemara says is from Rav Papa, who says no, she had already had a biyah after she grew up, before chuppah. You would think chuppah would be done before biyah, but no, chuppah here was done after the biyah, seeing as they were married already after all. Rav Ashi gives a different answer. He says that here we punished the guy who went and grabbed her away. He did something that was completely inappropriate and went and took a married woman from her chuppah. He was able to, technically, because she was only married, midrabanan, but that's not a correct thing to do, and therefore, even though his kiddushin should have been chal deraisa, we took that kiddushin away. We were mafkia at hefker bezin hefker. We were mafkia his kiddushin. The Gemara says hefker bezin hefker doesn't work here. The Gemara asks hefker bezin hefker only works from this kesef kiddushin. Here he did a kiddushay biyah. Now, could be that he did kiddushay kesef, but what if he did kiddushay biyah? So we don't know there. So Gemara says, no, we can be mafkia kiddushay biyah also because everybody who does a kiddushin is al das rabbanan. We say das moshevi. So, and the Chachamim could say this is not al da'atenu. We don't agree to this, and therefore this kiddushin does not count. And that's why Rav Bruna and Rav Chananel paskin that there is no validity to the second marriage, but not because the first one had matured automatically. Okay, now the Gemara just concludes with a psak in the three-way machlokes we had in our previous brisa about what happens when a Ketana Yesoma is married and her sister falls to even to her husband, and now she's in a chosek ukasa. What do? The Zika Deraisa, she's only married to Rabbanan. So the Gemara says the psak is like Rabbi Eliezer, that she is told to do mian. We teach her to do mian. This concludes the Gemara's commentary on the Mishnah. Now we get to our next Mishnah. Now we get the next Mishnah, which discusses what happens when two co-wives are falling to Yibum, but they have different statuses as to the legality of their marriage. So we're going to talk about three types of women here: a Yisoma Ketana, who is only married to her husband midrabanan; a Chareshes, who is a deaf mute, who in the days of Chazal may not have had any das at all, and is also only married midrabanan. and a pikachas, which is a regular woman. So the general rule we'll see in this Mishnah, if the two sisters are on the same level, so doing bia or yibum or chalitza to one of them will pater the other is set free. If they're on different levels, then not necessarily can we say that, because we don't know which one was the real marriage and which one was only a takana or a derabanan marriage. So the Mishnah begins at first cases where the two Tsaros were Yevamos Ketanos. They both had a derabanan marriage. There, their marriages are on the same level, equal footing. A bia or a chalitza to either of them, that is a yibum or a chalitza to either of them, paters the other one, she goes free to the shuk without anything. Now, if they were two charoshos, same halacha, because their marriages are on equal footing again. If one was a charashos and one was a ketana, now we don't know which one the husband preferred, which one did he consider to be his real marriage. And apparently it's dependent on that. So therefore, the bia, whatever it is, the Mishnah doesn't specify, it will not pater the tzara. Any action you do to one will not pater the tzara, because it could be that the tzara was the real marriage, and the one that you did the bia or the chalitza to is not the real marriage and doesn't pater the other one. Now, if you had a pikachas, that's a regular, healthy adult woman, and a chareshes, so the pikachas has a marriage d'oraisa, chalitza or even to her paters the chareshes, but vice versa does not. Yibum or chalitza to the chareshes does not pater the pikachas. Now, if you had a regular pikachas gedola, an adult, and a ketana, same thing would apply. The ketana is only married to derabanan, therefore yibum or chalitza to her doesn't pater the gedola, but yibum or chalitza to the gedola does pater the ketana, who is only married midirabanan, and that sets her free. Now, the Gemara is going to focus on the idea that there is such a thing as chalitza to a charashas, and that'll pretty much be the discussion of the rest of the daf. The Gemara asks, we have a Mishnah, it says explicitly in Daf Kov Daled, that a cheresh and a charashas both cannot participate in chalitza. And over there we learned in the Gemara, the issue there is not the das that they may or may not have, and the Gemara over there seems to understand that they do have the das required to be able to do the charashas. The problem is that they can't speak. And if they can't speak, they cannot read the parsha, which is part of the chalitza procedure. So therefore, their chalitza, they can't do a chalitza. They have to find some other way. If you have a charesh is falling to yibum, or a woman falling to yibum to a cheresh, you have to figure out some other way out of it. So how does this Mishnah say that the chalitza of a chareshes has any effect? So the Gemara says two answers to this. The first one is Rav Gidel, the name of Rav, who says the Mishnah never directly said the chalitza of the chareshes. It referred to what it said earlier about the ketanos. It said bia or chalitza. So here it said same thing, but the same thing wasn't referring to the when it said same thing by the chareshes, it wasn't referring to bia and the chalitza. It was referring to only the bia, only the yibum. That's the only thing that can have an effect. So when we said that it doesn't work, let's say for the chareshes, doesn't work for the ketana or for the pikachas, we were talking about a bia, we were not talking about a chalitza, because chalitza doesn't work anyway. Now Rava gives a different answer. According to some gerses, it's Rabbah, and his answer is that there's a difference between two types of chareshes. That's a chareshes who was born in the status of being a deaf mute, the status of chareshes, is different than one who developed that condition while she was married. Why is there a difference? So the concept is, however you go in, that's how you go out. If she was a chareshes at the time of her marriage, it means she got married without speaking. She got married with all communications being nonverbal. So if she could get married with nonverbal communication, then a nonverbal chalitza will work for her. If, however, she got married with a verbal communication, you can't do a chalitza with a nonverbal communication, and therefore chalitza doesn't work. Therefore, the Mishnah that said that it doesn't work, she doesn't have chalitza, you got to figure something else out, that was talking about where she got married when she was a pikachas, she had a verbal communication. You can't get out of that. This Mishnah that says chalitza works is when she was a chareshes the entire time. Everything is not verbal, and therefore communication works just fine. Now the Gemara is going to have a list of kashas on this statement of Rabbah, that there's a difference, and the Gemara is going to end up rejecting it. Now, all the proofs are pretty much going to follow the same structure. We'll have a brisa or a mishnah that clearly shows that a cheresh and chereshes can't do chalitza. And the Gemara is going to try to prove that it's talking about where they were a cheresh or chereshes from before, from birth, and still the chalitza is invalid. And the Gemara is going to try to get out of it by saying, no, we're talking about where she was a pikachas, or a pikeach before. In the end, the Gemara will come to a conclusive proof that can't be what's happening. So the first brisa, the first Mishnah, is talking about where you had two brothers that are, one is a pikeach, one is a cheresh, and they're each married to a wife similar to them. The wives are not related to each other. The cheresh is married to a chereshes, the pikeach is married to a pikachas. And if one of the brothers dies, what should the other one do? So the Mishnah says as follows: if the cheresh dies and his wife, the chereshes, falls to yibum to a pikeach brother, so he cannot, the implication is clear, he cannot do chalitza. So he's got to do yibum. If he doesn't want to stay with her, he could give her a get afterwards. As a pikeach, he could give her a get, and you can give a get to a chareshes because you can give a get to a woman bal karcha. She doesn't have to understand what's happening, and that's fine. However, if it's reversed, that is, the pikeach dies and the pikachas falls yibum to the cheresh, so again he can't do chalitza. He can do yibum. Yibum is just a bien and works bal karcha. That's fine. However, he can't give a get. So she's stuck with him. She can't get out. She can't get a chalitza. She can't get a get from him because there is no way to get a chalitza or a get from a cheresh. So the Gemara says, simple pshat. We're talking about a normal case where she was where the cheresh and chereshes here were all along, and we said clearly here that the chalitza doesn't work. So the Gemara says, no, we're talking about a different case, talking about where they were pikachas and then became chareshim, and therefore there's no raya from here. So this is Gemara next proof. We have a brisa that says a slightly different case. You have two brothers who are both pikchim, and they're married to two independent women, not related to each other. One is a pikachas and one is a chareshes. Now, what happens when the brothers die? So if the husband of the pikachas, he dies, and therefore the pikachas falls to even to a pikeach, no problem. You can do even do chalitza, no issues. If it's the other way around, the husband of the chareshes dies and the chareshes falls to yibum to the pikeach, so here you can't do chalitza to chareshes. He's got to do yibum, and if he wants to send her away, he can give her a get afterwards. Get works bal karcha. So again, you clearly see that a chareshes cannot get chalitza. Now, don't tell me here that we were talking about where she was a pikachas in the beginning, because when we say pikeach, that means a pikeach all along. It doesn't mean where there was a cheresh and then became a pikeach, and therefore the cases should be similar. Pikeach was that status all along. Chareshes should also be that status all along. Versus no, not necessarily. Pikeach was pikeach all along. Chareshes was first a pikachas, and then she became a chareshes. So as where we have a third case. All these cases are all in the same Mishnah coming up soon enough. Kuf Yud Beis. But the third case, it itself is not going to be a kasha, but it is going to show us that all the cases we're discussing here are about a cheresh and a chareshes who were in that status all along, not a condition that developed later. Now, what's the third case? So the third case is where you had two brothers, just like our first case. One is a pikerech and one is a cheresh, and they're married to women who are pikachas and chareshes. Each one is married to one similar to him. Here there's an additional wrinkle, though, and that's that the women are sisters. And therefore, each one is an achos ishto, achos zikukoso, whatever happens when they die. So the Mishnah now works through how things work. So if you have the cheresh married to the chareshes, if he dies, so now you have a chareshes falling to even to a pikeach, who is the sister of his wife. So there's no problem, because the one who's falling to Yibum is an achos ishto. His ishto is a pikachas, he's a pikeach. It's a full-fledged deraisa marriage. The woman who's falling to him is an achos ishto, she's free. Now, the Mishnah continues, what happens when it's the reverse? What happens when it's a pikeach who dies, and now you have a pikachas falling to Yibum to the cheresh, who is married to her sister, who is a chareshes. So first of all, he has to divorce his wife, and that's because the marriage of a cheresh to a chareshes is only a marriage d'Rabbanan, and now there is a zika d'Oraisa to his wife's sister. That zika makes the wife an achos zikukaso, which is stronger. It's achos zikukaso d'Oraisa, which is stronger than their d'Rabbanan marriage, uproots it, so he has to give his wife a get. Now, so that's out. Now, the question is, what happens to his Yevama? So she is a pikachas following him to Yibum. He's a cheresh, so he can't do chalitza. He can't do Yibum either, and the reason he can't do Yibum is because she is an achos ishto. he had a derabanan marriage to her sister, even though that marriage is not strong enough to survive the Zika, but it is strong enough to make it also her to do Yibum. Therefore, she is Asura L'Olam. She can't do Yibum, she can't do Chalitza. There's no way out for her. Now, the Gemara says, let's analyze this. This case, Rashi explains, is not a kasha on Rava or Rabba, because here there is no argument that if she was married as a cheresh, she should be able to go out as a cheresh. The fact that she can't get chalitza from the cheresh is not a problem here, because she married a pikeach. She's a pikeach she's a pikachas who married a pikeach. Their marriage was done verbally. To break that with a cheresh, you can't do. So there's no problem over here. Rava's fine with this case. The problem is that this case clearly has to be that the cheresh and the chereshes that are here have to be that they were cheresh and charashas from birth. It can't be that they were originally married as pikchim and then developed cheresh condition. And the reason for that is because we said that the cheresh divorces his wife. Now, a cheresh who was married as a pikeach is married deraisa, then it becomes a cheresh can only get divorced midrabanan. That doesn't work. The get given by a cheresh doesn't work. It can undo a derabanan cheresh marriage. So it's got to be that he was a cheresh all along, and therefore he can give a get. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. So, and the Gemara quotes a Bryce that says that halacha, a woman, it's a Mishnah, a woman who is nischarsha, she developed chareshus, you can divorce her. A pikeach can divorce her because you can divorce a woman b'karcha, therefore you could divorce a chareshus. If she became crazy, she became a shota, you shouldn't divorce her. The Rabban did not allow it because she cannot take care of herself and she'll become hefker. However, if he became a cheresh or he became a shota, he can't give a get. So there you see that he wouldn't be able to give a get. It must be that he was a cheresh all along. If that's the case, he was a cheresh all along, then we're going to say that since this is all the same at Mishnah as the other cases, then it's got to be that that the women in this case who are charashas were also charashas all along. And if the women here were charashas all along, then the case we had previously of the nachrios, the unrelated women, are also charashas all along, and therefore we go back to our original kasha before, where we saw clearly that they can't get chalitza. So this was a kasha that was asked. So the Gemara says that it was Abai who asked it, either to Rabba or to Rava, and he was quiet. Meaning he accepted this as a refutation of his position. So Rav Yosef came and he said, why are you accepting this rejection of your position? You can't, just because in this case the sisters here are charashas all along, does not mean that the case of the unrelated women, which we had earlier, they were charashas, they were charashos all along as well. Well, maybe here they are all along, and there they weren't all along. But there is a different kasha, and that the Gemara is going to say is the final kasha on Rava. What's that case? So here the Mishnah discusses what happens when you have two brothers marrying two women, and here either the two men or the two women are both cheresh or chereshes. So there's 6 different cases here. Either if both men, the two brothers are chereshin, and the women could be whatever you want. They could both be charashos, both pikos, one cheresh, one pikachas, doesn't matter. Or both women are charashos, and the men doesn't matter. One's a pikach, both are a pikach, none are a pikach, doesn't matter. As long as you have the two women or the two men being charashos, now the two marriages are on equal footing. They're equally only derabanan marriages. Neither is stronger than the other. So now, what happens if someone falls to yibum here? Or if they both fall to yibum. So, since the marriages are equal, so if the two women are sisters, they are both achos ishto. Neither one uproots or overrides the other one, and no yibum or chalitza is required. If they are not sisters, so then there is no p'tor. The psak is that you can't do chalitza because you can't have chalitza to or from a cheresh. And if you want, they can do yibum and then they can give a get. Now, we're obviously here talking about where the men were chereshim all along, because you cannot have a man give a get if he got married as a pikeach and now he's a cheresh, as we said earlier. Since the men have to be chereshin all along, the women also have to be chereshin all along, and yet we said clearly that chalitza doesn't work. Why shouldn't chalitza work? According to Rava or Rabba, it should work. He said, as long as they came in non-verbally, they could go out non-verbally. So the Gemara concludes, Tiyufta, the Rabba, here it says Rabba, earlier it said Rava, Tiyufta, and therefore there's no answer to this. Okay, the Gemara now moves on and has a comment on the next part of the Mishnah, where we had seen that if a man is married to a kitana and a charashes, they both fall to yibum. So we said the yibum or chalitza to one of them doesn't pater the other, because we don't know which one is the one that he actually intended to be his wife. Maybe one was a real wife and the other one was not a real wife because he prefers one over the other. So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman said, I found Rav Ada bar Ava and Rav Chana, his son-in-law, sitting in the shuk of Pompedisa, and they were expounding, they were saying Divrei Torah, and they said that this halacha, that they both require yibum or chalitza, and one doesn't pater the other, is only true if their husband was a pikeach. As a pikeach, you don't know which one he preferred. Did he prefer a ketana who was going to grow up and have das and be a normal wife, or did he prefer a chereshes who's a gedola right now, and she's a bas bia right now? However, they said, if the husband was a cheresh, then we assume that he preferred the chereshes. He preferred the fact she was a gedola, and he also preferred the fact that she was similar to him. He did not want the ketana. Therefore, the yibum or the chalitza to the chereshes, well, not chalitza according to the Gemara, but the yibum to the chereshes would pater the ketana, because the chereshes is the real wife here. Says the Gemara, that Rav Nachman himself said that he disagreed. He said, no, even if the husband is a cheresh, still we're not clear who he prefers. Now, in the case of this suffix, what do you do for each of them? So Rav Chizda says the name of Rav. So the chereshes he has to marry, he has to do yibum, cannot do chalitza. If he wants to give her get afterwards, he can. The ketana can't do chalitza, she has to wait until she grows up, and then she has to do chalitza then at that point.